I'm Jeff Lyons. This is podcast number one, Inside Look.
Number one.
We got number one here to start it off. Randy Moore, in case you don't know, celebrating 40-plus years in the Evansville market.
If you don't know by now.
And you're retiring at the end of the year.
Yes.
So we wanted to get some of your thoughts. We wanted to extract your institutional knowledge and have it here for posterity and learn a little bit more about you, too.
Well, absolutely. In fact, something was going on in the newsroom today and for these last several days, and that is I put out a note and I said, I'd like to just dump the contents out of my brain out here on anybody who'd like to take it, because certainly I've accumulated some bit of wisdom over the last 40 years. And
well,
so
we
let's get it
hope,
out there.
you put this much time into swinging the pick, you hope there's some gold in there somewhere.
Right.
So, well, Randy, I wanted to we're going to kind of walk through your life. Not like this is your life story, but, a lot of people see you all the time on television. They see us all the time. They don't really know much about us other than, I like that guy, or, there's the news guy or whatever. So walk me through your neighborhood, your childhood. What was that like for you?
Okay. Well, I grew up on the east side of Evansville, the near east side. I grew up on East Virginia Street between Alvard and Bakey, and lived there. We were 4 years old when I was 4 years old when we moved there, and then stayed there all through my growing up years. Came back for a little bit even after college and lived with mom and dad until I could get my feet under myself and go out on my own and get a place. But went to Harper Elementary School, and I think, Jeff, we've talked about a lot of these kinds of things off camera, but lived a kind of a charmed childhood looking back on it. I mean, things were really, really good. Wesselman Woods, which was Stockwell Woods when I was growing up, Wesselman Park wasn't there. I remember looking down the street and seeing the playground equipment going in. It was just Stockwell Woods, and it was an extended backyard for us. So I've talked about those things that had an effect on my boyhood: Wesselman Woods, East Side Little League. What else?
You were Boy Scouts.
Boy Scouts.
Right.
Yeah, and those things at Methodist Temple, where I serve now as associate pastor, those things had a tremendous impact, on my life. So. Had great parents. I had a little brother and an older brother, and so it was good.
What did your folks do for a living?
My father was a tool and die maker, and my mom was a homemaker.
Okay, back when we had those. Yeah, my mom was at home too, at least for a while, and then she started working when we were in school. But and your dad was a tool and die maker, so did he always come home with really dirty hands and always like one broken fingernail? You know how
his hands were scarred. He had so many stitches over the years on his hands. Yeah. But he was a good one. I mean, it was amazing to hear the stories when he died. Everybody that came to the funeral, he was highly skilled. He was very, very good at it. And mom, and she wasn't the only stay-at-home mom. I think probably most moms were stay-at-home moms.
Yeah.
And today they look at you cross-eyed if a woman's going to stay at home, right? And mom never did earn a paycheck anywhere. Now, she did a little bit of babysitting, and she was paid for it, but it wasn't like she got a paycheck and benefits and things like that.
Probably hung her laundry out on the line and, watched her stories in the afternoon, that kind of stuff.
Well, we had one family, if you're looking out our front door. On this side were the Dunnings. Some people might remember Al Dunning. He was a sports columnist for the Evansville newspapers, and his little brother Tommy was an editor as well. His parents lived there. And one of their daughters lived on this side of us. And so our house was the path in between. They literally would come through our house, going back and forth.
Shortest distance between 2 points, right?
Yeah, and stop and have a cup of coffee and tell stories, catch up on news. Yeah, so like I say, it really was a wonderful childhood. I think parents protect their children from some of the family secrets, and it's fun later learning those.
Right.
But growing up, just everything was fine.
Yeah. So when did you first come in contact with television? When did it make an impression on you? Like, were you a Howdy Doody viewer, Captain Kangaroo, Uncle Dudley? What'd you watch?
All of that. Uncle Dudley, which we're reminded every day of Uncle Dudley here at Channel 14, because as you come in the front door to the right is Dudley's Diner, named for Uncle Dudley. And there's, I guess, maybe a few props from the Uncle Dudley show.
Yeah.
There's a television up there, and his pictures.
Jerry Giraffe is under glass. So
Jerry Giraffe. So I drew a picture for Uncle Dudley and mailed it in. And I remember, I think this may be two stories that I'm combining into one, but I didn't even put the postage on it. I just, I got the address, tucked it in there, and it made it.
Wow.
Because he might have even mentioned that the letter made it, and then he showed it on the air, the drawing that I'd made.
So you owe Uncle Dudley 3 cents for the postage sometime, somewhere,
maybe two or 3 cents. Of course, Peggy Mitchell on the competing station, but back then you're not thinking about competing stations. You were just watching all those stations. And so we talked about this some too. It won't be exactly the same, but I think television is going to be into a kind of a back to the future kind of a deal going into the next many years, because I just think it's going to become more and more local.
It'll have to become more and more local, because the big owners that like Gray and Sinclair, all the different media owners, they don't want to pay for that syndicated programming.
Right.
When they have people like us sitting around in the newsroom, they're like, well, what can we get them to do? And it's like, well, that's a point well taken. We love to tell stories and talk. It's not like tool and die making. You probably won't get a thumb smash doing this.
Right.
So you didn't fall off the tool and die making. That wasn't your branch of the tree. When did you?
That was going to be. I remember it was a project at school, and you had to say what you wanted to be when you grew up. And I said I wanted to be a tool and die maker. Now, I caught the photography bug, and this is something else you and I have talked about, and had my own dark room and mowed lawns and saved up money and bought a single lens reflex 35 millimeter camera. And I was just fascinated by photography. And people, you talk about someone's gift, and if I can say this, I wish I had been gifted as a baseball player, because that's what I wanted to do. I thought, well, I'd love to end up being a Major League Baseball player, but that wasn't my gift. But I could kind of tell early on that I was a little better at photography than almost anybody else.
You had a good eye.
I knew.
Yep.
Yeah. So that just captured my imagination and my attention. And I think that's what eventually led me into journalism work, communicating news visually, through television.
And it's interesting, because we both did. In fact, when you describe your childhood, mine happened just about 10, 12 years later than yours, but almost the same way. My dad was a teacher, not a tool and die maker, and my mom stayed at home with us, and the neighbors, everybody was into everybody's business. But for me, the photography, it didn't become magical until the darkroom.
Right.
And I, had all that junk set up in the bathroom with a towel over the window and that. But the ability to take whatever you had shot and crop it and play around, that was intriguing to me, because then you could make a picture really good as opposed to just okay.
Yeah. The polycontrast filters did it for me. You could take, and I always thought I want to produce the very best negative I can. Today, there's so much in post-editing where you can fix what you've done. I always thought I want to capture the very best image I can and create the very best negative that I can. But then those where you weren't perfect, those polycontrast filters in your enlarger.
Yeah, you could drop them in there and bring stuff out.
Yeah,
it was fun to be able to manipulate like that, and then blow up. Because like an 8x10, if you got it at the drugstore, it was expensive. That was a couple lawns mowed to do that. But you could make an 8x10 at home for much less than that. And so of course you learn quickly. You burn through the paper quickly. Printing all 8x10s. But so you did photography. And then at some point, being on television must have come into the equation. So when did that happen?
Well, I remember being with my friends on a weekend, and then I would pick up the newspaper and I would read it as if I was reading a newscast. So I had a fascination with that. When I got to college, I actually went to college intending to major in photojournalism. And you're talking about the expense of photography. Sure. I was the son of a tool and die maker and a mom who wasn't bringing home a paycheck. I didn't have the funds that a lot of the students that I was taking these classes with had, and so they would have the cameras and the lenses and they unlimited supply of paper and all this. And I got discouraged by that, and I switched then to broadcast journalism, and so that's part of the way that happened. But I kept my photography, because I essentially switched from still photography to video photography. And then, I always say this to our people, we do journalism. That's our core business, is journalism. But because we do it on television, we have to honor the medium and do the best television that we can do. But it's always about journalism. So I think that's how those got married.
Yeah. So the picture, of course, is worth 1,000 words. To use
Sure.
a really old and worn cliche. And now that you're coming up on your retirement here at the end of the year, I noticed. I think it was last week. You put out an email to the station, the reporters here, and that you making yourself available with story tips and things like that, which you are anyway, because you're kind of you're like the managing editor of our newscast and a mentor figure in the newsroom. What is it that excites you about it? Like, what makes a good story in your book? Because Lord knows you've read millions of stories, and about 999,000 of them are just the traffic wreck or whatever. But what is it that really sparks you and you say, man, that's what we could be all the time?
Well, it's all about storytelling, and this is what we talked about in the first meeting that you mentioned, where I sent out that email. And there's all sorts of definitions about what storytelling is, and there's some freedom to define it. But for me, it's like, well, it's a beginning and a middle and an end, like any other story. We want to narrate action. We want to see something happen. And you can't manufacture that, and so you sort of look for it. Another one of my adages is the best stories come from the best stories. And so a lot of times you can look at like the story archetypes sometimes and see what is it that makes a good story, like rags to riches, or just any of those classic stories. Right. And you can see those things, and they work. The things that have tension and drama and someone overcoming adversity. But to tell a story through the eyes of the people who are affected by it. I always ask the question when we talk about who is it that's being featured in this story, and at what role do they have in the story. And in too many cases, they're standing outside of the story. If we're talking about some kind of an official or a spokesperson, they don't have a story. They stand outside it. The best stories come from the people who are on the inside, actually affected by the news.
But as we know, we work in a deadline intense business, and the dream story seldom happens.
Right.
I mean, you have to get down, you got to talk to the media person, the PIO with the police department, whatever it is, and move on to the next thing, which was when I reported, and I'm sure when you reported too, that was a frustration, because you thought, man, if I only had a couple of days. And of course, they throw you out of the newsroom if you said, can I have 2 days to work on this story, because there's not time.
I always say, if you only had my job, because I tell the reporters, I said, I'm not in the daily grind anymore. Yeah. So I can sort of watch and say, wow, there's a story that would make a good story. And then I have the luxury to do it and to take my time to do it. But back to baseball, I tell our reporters, I say, nobody bats 1,000. If you bat 300, you're in the Hall of Fame. It's the same way with the story. On many days, more days than not, it's going to be the grind. But make sure that you're doing something that's really, really good and you can be really, really proud of once a month, twice a month, because that keeps you coming back.
It does. Yeah. And that's when I was a feature reporter. I know you did sports, which is kind of featurey. Sure. I mean, certainly there are features within sports. But you would hear, you get leads after you did it for a while. And there's this guy, that has a gold mine under his hen house in Union County. You might want to come down. And you would think, oh my gosh, that's going to be and it would be a dud. Yeah. And you would think, well, what did I do wrong? How could I miss? And it always comes around to the subject, and then how you draw them out and tell it. So do you have any secret sauce that you use to get your subjubjects to?
Well, normally you just clam up, really.
The reporter clams up. Yeah.
The reporter clams up. Yeah. You ask why questions, and then you just wait. And if someone stops talking, don't interrupt the silence. And then inevitably they'll come out and they'll tell you the story that you're really wanting to hear. That's a couple of little things that we do, because most people are not trained in being on television and telling their story, so they need something to ease into it. Yeah. And it's kind of mean in the sense that you force them to tell the story because they want to fill in the gaps, but it works almost 100% of the time. Yeah.
I can remember about being quiet and listening. is the hardest skill, because you're always thinking, well, what's the next question? How do I follow that up? And you should just listen and clam up, as you say. I remember being sent on a story. It was Ernie the Hobo. You probably did him too. He was in Shawneetown. And this guy had done like features with everybody. The Today Show had come, I'm sure all the local media. So by the time I got to him, he was jaded. You know, he said, oh, you know, your name and spell it, which is typically the first thing you do in there. I am Ernie, king of the hobos, you know, wild on the rails. And had this whole spiel. And I could never break through the canned answers, you know, because he'd answered every question.
Exactly.
So what do you do in that situation?
Oh, gosh, I don't know. Turn around and go home?
Well, that could be. See if there's something across the street. What's it like living next to Ernie, the king of the hobos, right?
Well, I do say that, too. I say when all the cameras are trained in this direction and you're looking for a unique angle, literally a unique angle, look in the other direction. And there's sometimes a good story back there.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
You talked about going across the street. You've done that a couple times in your career.
Yeah.
First, you were at Channel 7, then
Yep.
25, then here. What's that like to work? You know, I mean, obviously, when you're at any one of the stations, so of course we're here at 14. It's, you know, we're out to get them. They're the
Right.
enemy. They can't do anything
Sure.
right. You know, and then you always wonder what they're saying about us over there. What was that like to wear the Channel 7 mantle for what,
32 years.
32 years, and now
Yeah.
whoosh, you're at 25.
Yeah.
You know,
Well, I thought I would be one who stayed at that same station my whole career.
at Channel 7.
At Channel 7. Yeah, and, you know, you sort of laugh, chuckle at the people that hit the trifecta. You know, they've been at all the stations and bounced around. But what happened was the owner of Channel 7 bought Channel 25, and those two stations merged. What was interesting about that merger was and is that the purchasing station moved into the station that they purchased.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden now I'm working for 25, and it was in the morning, and I'd been evenings all my career, and I'm not that much of a morning person. It wasn't something that I wanted to do. And then I've said this so many times since I've decided to retire and have been talking about it, but I have been so lucky. I have been so fortunate. You know, David James, who had been here 40 years, his career is winding down as my contract is winding down at Channel 7 and Channel 25. And boom, I was able to come in and replace David. And I thought about this just today. There have only been 2 male anchors at Channel 14 in the last 50 years.
Yeah, I mean it's
yeah.
unbelievable how the turnover in certain spots here
Sure.
is very low.
Yeah.
And weather's the same way. I'm like the 5th or 6th weather person at 10 because Marcia was at 10 for so many years. When you walked in the door here, then do you bulky race, 25 and 7, or is that like accumulated knowledge and you're like, okay, well that's probably what they're going to do over there, so we'll do it this way? Does that come into it?
No, I mean, here's what I think about. I have a lot of pride of ownership still with Channel 7.
Yeah.
Because, frankly, Channel 7 isn't what it used to be. I got caught up in a kind of a duopoly over there, and so I think this is true. I mean, I think I was the longest sports director over there. I don't think anybody anchored the news over there as long as I did.
I can't think of anybody, I mean, before, certainly not after.
Right.
And there was a string before, too, that I can remember watching. So
Right, and we were always chasing 14, and 14 has always been the number one station, and back in those days was a real dominant number one. And so we were always, chasing Channel 14. But I tell you what would have been the thing that would have kept me there, and it would have been okay if we never did catch Channel 14, was that we made that flip from ABC to Fox and put on that 9 o'clock newscast that actually succeeded. I mean, it was a really good
and it was turning heads over here. I'm sure
Yeah.
you heard that, but of course we were hemmed in by NBC. We couldn't, knock out Law and Order or ER or one of those to do a newscast.
That was the magic of the whole Fox thing.
Yeah.
Right.
It really was. And of course, there was that, at that time, which would have been the mid to late 90s, kind of that news with an attitude and weird camera angles and a little
Foxification,
more,
we called it.
Right,
Let's
right.
get foxified. We used the two most aggressive colors on the color palette, red and yellow. Remember that logo?
Oh, sure, I remember it. Ketchup and mustard, and but it worked, and Fox 7 stuck forever. And I think it was because you took it from 44, wasn't 44 Fox, and then it went to Channel 7.
Yes,
and they had built their entire branding around Fox 44, Fox 44 Kids Club, and then it's gone, and then they become CBS. And we haven't really mentioned 44 in here because 44 didn't even exist in '83. I guess it started. And that was the only one you didn't get to. But, retirement, I mean, there's always freelance opportunities everywhere.
Yeah.
So
it'll probably be like this. This is my second podcast today. We do a podcast at my church, and we recorded that today. So if there's a future for me in a connected field, it might be in podcasting. We'll see.
And if you don't know, Randy is a pastor at Methodist Temple.
Mm-hmm.
I think you said that earlier on. I've always been curious, what's the intersection of religion, faith, and media like for you?
Yeah. Well, a lot of people are surprised by it. Like, and I said this in my very first sermon at Methodist Temple. I said, I know what you're thinking. What's my news anchor doing in my pulpit? It's a context thing.
Yeah.
And it takes some getting used to, because that's how most people know me, is from being on their TV screen in their living room or their bedroom or their family room or wherever they watch their television, and it takes a while to adjust. But there's a lot of commonalities. We both operate under the First Amendment, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah, and it's about delivering a message. I also joke that I bring the bad news Monday through Friday and the good news on Sunday. And of course, it's public speaking. Only in church I can see who I'm speaking to,
which is nice.
Yeah,
sometimes you can watch them doze off slowly. There, we can only imagine it here, on the thing. So, what did you tell them the first day? Then you said you're probably wondering why I'm here. So tell us more, Reverend. Why am I here?
Oh, well, I got to Methodist Temple from the first appointment that I had. I've been in ministry through the Methodist Church since 2012. And so that's a whole long story, but I've been serious about my faith for all of my life, and then had a very, very good friend who was my pastor at Aldersgate United Methodist Church, who became the district superintendent. And then he sort of tricked me into subbing up in Spencer County at a couple of churches as he looked for a pastor to replace the one who had just left. And while I was doing that, he says, I'd like you to take a church permanently when you finish here. And I did it.
Yeah.
And I did it. So that was Baker Chapel United Methodist Church, 6 miles east of Boonville in Dagonia Springs. And, of course, you're familiar with it because the tornado that hit in 2005.
And tore it down. I mean, it destroyed that church.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. And, I'm sure you must draw some sermon material from being in this business all the time.
Right.
And by contrast, you probably draw some of your faith, your background into your work every day here too, I'm assuming.
Right. Yeah. The thing that I think is helpful, and it's another thing, I haven't talked about this a lot lately. I think most people know it. Plus, we've just become more sensitive over the last 5 or 10 or 15 years about the subject matter that we cover, because before, I mean, it was if it bleeds, it leads kind of an attitude was in play, and so we just dealt with a lot of awful stuff. And I would coach our people, stay close to your emotions, stay close to your feelings. There's the newsroom humor. There's the Don Henley song, that's very critical, dirty laundry. And but lately, I think we've been better at that anyway, and we don't need that coaching as much, because I think that society has changed enough that we're looking out for our well-being and our mental health anyway. We don't have to be reminded, don't totally block out all the stuff that we cover and don't be cold to it either.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think one of the problems is, at least in television news, like we do every day, is context. We will run any number of, mugshots or, crime. And you would think after watching a half an hour of the news, there's not going to be any cars left in the parking lot, that all these horrible things are happening.
Exactly.
And we kind of had that even during the pandemic, where you just felt like that virus was around every corner, ready to, and certainly the pandemic was, huge. Biggest story I'm sure we've ever will be involved with. But how do you think people can apply context to what we give them on whatever screen it happens to be, because we concentrate a lot of bad stuff in one spot? I mean, would you agree with that, or am I just too thin-skinned?
Absolutely, and I'm fighting kind of a losing battle on this, but I had a wake-up call. I've got 7 grandchildren. A couple of my grandchildren were home. I mean, they were in town. They're from out of town. They were here. And they turned on the TV, their other grandparents turned on the TV, and I come on the news, and it's murder after car accident. They had to turn it off.
Sure.
Well, they came the other day, and they visited the same 2 grandsons, and it was a miracle. The newscast wasn't all that murdery,
right?
Frankly. And so we didn't have to take the kids out, and it made me think in both cases, we need to be thinking about who we're exposing to this stuff to.
I've had that happen. I'll have a scout troop visit. The boy, Cub Scouts here from troop, 495 are here from Linville. Come on in, and they sit down and we show them the cameras and the lights. Okay, now we're going to be quiet because the news comes on. And, then the first story is, some child molester, and the second one is some horrible. And you're like, pay no attention, and I don't think they necessarily hear it, they're just looking around at all the lights.
Exactly.
But I mean, it's definitely local news is PG-13, I think, at the bare minimum. If you were rating it, at least the news part of it, weather's pretty G-rated most of the time.
Yeah. Well, and you hear this all the time, and I think it's true that people take a break from news sometimes, or they don't watch it. And I understand what they're talking about. Now, some of that is, and I think that research bears this out, while people might say they don't like it, it's what they end up
they're
being
watching,
attracted to.
And there's a reason we run the murders and the wrecks and everything, because they do research, and it's like, well, that's what people want.
Yeah.
And you're like, how could somebody want this? But somebody does. So,
well, it's a matter of low-hanging fruit, I think, is part of it, and that's why we do it. I mean, it's available and it's there. But I think that we do a pretty good job at that. I mean, we talk about it. We really do talk about it. It might not seem like it, but we do. And we say, is it really necessary that this mugshot go on? Are we really going to follow this case all the way through the courts to an outcome? No, this is probably going to be it. And here's someone on the worst day in their life, and their face is flashed up on television. So we do talk through those things. So
we being editorial, we have editorial meetings here twice a day,
and they happen, and discussions happen all day long.
So. And I know you've been talking about this for a while, retirement, quietly and then privately, and now, of course, very publicly. And so starting 2025, we have a retired Randy Moore floating around in the atmosphere out there. So what does a retired Randy Moore do and look like? I mean, you can be watching the news. I would say no. I mean, I don't know. What do you do?
I don't think it'll be. I'll probably become like a lot of our news consumers. I'll be consuming it on demand, I think.
Yeah.
I still do watch a fair amount of live television, news and sports. But I think once I'm retired, I don't know. It'll probably be a mixture. We'll see. I just don't quite know. Really,
you got 7 grandchildren. I mean, that's going to keep you busy. And of course, you're married.
I mean, they'll be traveling. We'll be traveling, and we'll be seeing them, and so that's a big part of it. I'm going to stay with Methodist Temple on a part-time basis. I don't want to go full-time. I do want to enjoy the freedom of retirement.
Well, I think you said the other day, I mean, you've been working 65 years or 55 years, wasn't it?
45. Well, 45 in the business, but yeah.
No, but I mean, like from your first, cutting lawns, paper route kind of stuff.
Oh, yeah.
So it'll be strange, I'm sure, to wake up January 1, 2025, and it's like, what do I do today? It might be a very good thing.
Yeah. Well, some people might find it hard to leave it, and so they stay. I'm not in that position. I love my job. I love my career. I'm proud of what I've accomplished and what we've accomplished. But I can just walk away from it and just be who I am. I don't have any. I'm sure I'll miss the people, and I'll miss, some of the adrenaline. There'll be a lot about it that I miss, but I'm looking forward to the next chapter.
Yeah, I'm sure you are, and it'll be an interesting I'm sure we haven't heard the last from you. You'll probably start a competing podcast to our inside look here. I still have to look at the thing because I can't remember how we finally branded it. There were many meetings, and this is what we came up with. So
I like the Lion's Den. What happened there?
So the thing with the Lion's Den was and that was my idea, but I pulled it. I said, well, we don't want it tied to me. It needs to be kind of generic to the station so other people can host it.
Sure.
And then, but actually, to claim credit, so I came up with Inside Look.
Okay.
But we had a lot of good ideas, and it may change. Who knows?
Yeah.
So we'll see. I was going to ask you one other question, and it had to do with retirement. When did you know? Because I'm a few years behind you, but not too far.
Mm-hmm.
And, my wife is retired, and I thought, I'm getting a little pressure, to follow suit. Now, of course, you need health insurance. So,
right.
That's one reason to stay on. And I love my work, too. But was there one thing that just you woke up one morning and said, that's it, I'm out?
No. I'm a kind of a by-the-book person. And I have reached my full retirement.
There you go.
My full Social Security retirement age. And so I thought, well, I'll just do that at my full retirement
being a good citizen.
age.
If the government says so, that's what I'll do.
Right.
Okay.
And, not to be morbid, but who knows how many more years, how many more years we have.
Yeah.
And so, there's a lot I would like to do that I haven't been able to do. Not only have I been working for 55 years, I've never been off a day, really. I'm off weekends. But most people are on the beach somewhere through their career. I don't know whether this is good or bad, but I've never been fired.
Like between jobs is what you're saying when you say on the beach, yeah.
Yeah, I've never been between jobs. I've worked the whole time, except for weekends and vacations.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
I don't think I've ever been fired either.
Mm-hmm. You would remember probably.
Well, you think it would cross my mind. I think I was just sort of not put on a schedule at Sir Beef. And I don't know why that was the case. The place had gotten robbed the week before. Maybe I just kind of took myself off the schedule.
Right.
It was one down here on St. Joe. And and I'm sure you had jobs like that, where you thought, well, this isn't going to go very long. I washed dishes at the Holiday Inn. That was a rough gig too. And I think I might have just kind of.
You know what? I might have been that kind of fired when the boss, I'm not even going to name the place.
No, you don't need to.
I'm not going to name it.
I'm safe because all of mine are defunct,
It was a summer job, and it was going to end anyway, but it ended a little sooner than maybe it should have. Yeah.
I remember, actually, that, you're the first person in the local media that I actually talked. You don't remember it, but I was working at the pub on Division Street, and you were in there. You were already working on Channel 7, so this would have been maybe 84, 1985.
I was a veteran by then.
Well, you were, and you were there, I guess, waiting for somebody or whatever, and just, having a drink at the bar. And I was a bar back or, busboy. And I think, I wouldn't say I was starstruck, but I just thought, there's a guy, I could ask him the questions I have, because I was a communications major at that point in college, but still didn't know where it was going to lead. And I remember coming over and just striking up a short conversation with you. I didn't want to bug you. Mm-hmm. And you were very kind and gracious, and encouraged me. And that was it. I don't know what I would have asked you, like, gee, how do I get in? But that was the other question. how'd you get the job at Channel 7? How did you break in?
I did an internship at 7, and I wanted to do, again, I was very, very lucky. I wanted to do a sports internship. They didn't have a sports internship. They did, but they already had an intern.
Yeah.
So I took a news internship. Then, when I graduated, I wanted a sports job. They didn't have one, but what I really needed was a job, and they had a news job. So I did news out on the street every day, turning stories for a year, and then did go to sports. But it served me so well when I came back to news.
Yeah.
that I'd been out on the street for a year.
Well, everything happens for a reason, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and I came, with my hat out looking for a job then when I graduated, and I couldn't catch, a cold in the Evansville market. I went to 25 and 7.
I saw you there.
Yeah, I think you saw me there. I was with Al Gendick or Jerry Burge or somebody, and you were very kind, like you always are. But you're not the hiring guy, and this place was like the fortress of solitude. I mean, you couldn't get in here, and the only reason I was able to crack in at 14, at least initially, was because of Mike Blake. And I'm sure everybody has a Mike Blake story, but my dad was an athletic director, Mike, of course, sportscaster, and so they knew one another. And so my dad, after I had been home a week after graduating college, all right, you're going to get on the horn and call Mike Blake and blah, blah, blah. And so I called Mike, and he at least got me in the door, and I talked to the news director, who then said, no, go work somewhere else for 2 years and then call me. And that was the best advice I got. I wasn't ready, I don't know who I thought I was.
14 was in the era of the character.
Oh, yeah. Lloyd
Right.
Lindsay Young had just left, and Marcia was still going strong.
And were they still looking for that type of character? Because that then ran its course.
It did, and I was sort of at the tail end of that because I was doing some kind of shtick type stuff in Terre Haute, the funny hats and the pie in the face sort of thing. And the manager here at the time, he was all about that. So when Marcia left, then they did call me, and I came down and interviewed and got it. But that was in '88, so I'd already been working 2.5 years,
But you were that transition guy because you're as funny as anybody I've ever worked with, and you were utilizing your sense of humor, and then it became more about meteorology,
Right.
which is important, and science, and cutting out all that stuff.
Right, just get to the point.
So you had both sides of it.
Yeah, well, and that's my career kind of straddled what I call the happy talk era, which you were a victim of too. Yeah. And then this breaking news, serious, everything's, important era. And so it's kind of a weird needle to thread. And I'm sure you've dealt, as I have, with consultants and with a lot of advice, most of it unsolicited, about how to do your thing. Mm-hmm. What do you do when the consultants say, well, you really ought to part your hair that way, and start your sentences with, you just smile politely? And
well, I did learn a lot from some of the consultants. Some of their stuff was really good, but then you realize finally that it's all kind of the same, and you've heard it before. Not that it's not good.
Right.
What's good is if you get actual research.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
where they interview viewers,
right,
and then give us numbers.
Yeah. But back in the day, you didn't get that necessarily, especially if you didn't pay for it. So a lot of it was just sort of cookie cutter generic research, but some of it was good. But in my own case, what happened was, once you become an entity in a market, and it's one of the things that's good about staying in the same market, especially in your hometown, now it's not about the way that you part your hair. It's because it's you.
Right.
So they haven't messed with me. I may not be the perfect anchor.
They put us in the hopeless cases category at the consulting agency. Like, well, that one's too old. He's too calcified. I'm in the same boat. And I've had, as I'm sure you have, all kinds of advice over the years, and ultimately you just have to be you, and they either will like you or not, and there's not much you can do about it.
We shouldn't talk this long about television without mentioning Marcia Yaki, because I was just thinking about that, and there is a connection, because she was authentic. She was wacky, but that was authentic, and that's all we can. That's all we can be. Is authentic. Right?
But I was in awe of her because she came into the pub frequently. I only saw you in there once, to your credit, but Marcia, frequent flyer. But I never felt like I could, sit down with her and have like this, like talk to her. She just seemed too Marcia, it's like, oh my gosh, that's Marcia Yaki, and I'm sure she would have talked to me had I asked.
Well, now she would.
Yeah,
because you worked with for how many years?
I didn't actually work with her because remember, she left and then I started. I met her several times. We did telethons and things like that together. And she was interesting, but she, one thing, you say she's authentic, and she absolutely was, but she was always on, too.
Yeah.
You always it was just like the wacky,
Uh-huh.
Which everybody will say, well, that's just how she was.
Yeah.
But it was a little much. It was a
Well,
lot.
she cranked it. Well, maybe she operates as a 7, and then she cranks it to a 9.
Right,
or
right.
maybe a
for
12.
TV, right.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But-
And, that's one thing that sets this market apart. We're kind of all in her shadow or on her coattails in some way because she was so unique. People knew about her around the country.
Right.
And then if you just happen to have the good fortune of working at one of the stations, so 7, 14, automatically you had people that were watching because this was a station, we watched because of Marcia. So, yeah, I've always felt indebted to her, in some way.
I did not know that you didn't work with her.
No, So when she retired, then
What year was that?
1988. That was in
Okay.
the summer, and she wanted to jump in the water. She always put on a bikini, and the news director said, "No, you're not going to do that this year," and she threw a fit and quit, and so they said, "No, come on back." So they kind of did a soft departure, but she had already moved down to the midday by that point.
Okay.
She was working with Ann Comas, and then they had the opening. So I didn't, they moved Kevin D up. Oh, he was doing 6, 10, and 5, and then I came in and was doing midday, and then he got a job offer in New York, which you got to take if you're single. He just married, but he was from L.A. anyway, so he left, and then I thought that I was the de facto, but I wasn't. I got passed over, and I was bitter about that at the time, but in many ways it was the best thing that could happen. It's funny how when things are happening now, you can't
Right.
see, if I had known then what I knew now, I would have write it out because this guy won't last, which he didn't. And then I moved up. So it all
Okay.
worked out,
But you're the expert, aren't you? You're the Marshall-Yaki expert.
Well, it turns
you're
out
kind
that
of
way.
The unofficial historian of the station, at least.
You're like that too, though. A lot of times
Yeah.
we'll talk about where's so and so during commercial breaks and that, and I think that's a product of being local people. Where you're just sort of instilled with these folks. So anyhow, I know you got more news to write here. We're actually recording this during the working hour, so you're technically on the clock here.
Right.
But anything else I didn't ask or wisdom you'd like to impart?
Oh gosh, I don't know. We've covered a lot of ground. I said this in my retirement announcement, and it has to do with the whole thing about being very, 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 very fortunate. And when I got here 10 years ago, and the station is what we call a legacy station, meaning it's been number one for about as long as you can remember television existing here in Evansville. And so I thought coming in and replacing David at this legacy station, don't screw this up.
Right.
And 10 years later, it's not me, but we haven't. And it's still number one and still a legacy station. And I am proud of that.
Yeah.
I would have been just as proud as I was talking about the sense of ownership and pride I have in Channel 7, WTVW. I could have finished out there and finished up and retired and been just as happy. But boy, it does feel good to be number one and to work for a team that wants to win and be number one and to be a part of it.
Yeah.
But there aren't any solo acts in television. There's no way to do anything by yourself. Even this,
Well, we're getting pretty close.
I know we're getting
Yeah.
close, but even this requires some support.
Right.
But it's a team effort.
Oh, it absolutely. Anything on the produced broadcast side, yeah.
Sure.
And you've got a room full of a smaller room
Right.
full of technicians and people who really care and want to put on a good product. So I think you nailed that exactly. I guess that's one of the regrets is that when you started, and certainly when I started, there were big staffs, lots
Right.
of people, and now there are fewer because of automation and technology, and fewer colorful people that were a little weird in their own rights.
Right.
You would always have a number of a quota of really weird people that worked in TV stations, which was the allure, I'm sure, for you too. You know, just characters.
Personalities have sort of evened out through the years.
They have. Everybody's just kind of, maybe it's the Prozac they put in the water. Who knows? Randy, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
And so we are off and running here with Inside Look. Watch for our next offerings here real soon.